Thank you so much for joining us today for our Trail Talk Tuesday. Today's talk is about let's get started, and it tells us, and the call is being recorded, and you will get a link to the website when it's posted and a copy of the presentation deck. At the end of this call, there's going to be 3 short survey questions. And I'm going to teach to the test and tell you what the questions will be. Please take just a moment and give us some response to that. Did you learn something today that you can use immediately? Number 2, how many people will you forward this information to? And number 3, what did you learn today that will be most useful to you? With that, we're going to start our talk with Mike Goodwin. Mike's efforts as a trail champion earned him KDHE's 2022 award as a Kansas Health Champion. Mike has been designing and building trails for more than 24 years and has worked with hundreds of aspiring trail builders statewide. Mike will help you understand the differences in trail materials and their associated costs, as well as the Trail in the Box resource, which he helped develop and deploy in multiple regions across the state.
Nancy, thank you. That last photo was actually my stunt double, not me, just so everybody knows. So today I'd like to just really focus on the cost of the trail surface. There will be other speakers after me today to talk about other things like bridges and culverts and signs and kiosks, but I want to talk about the trail surfaces, which is the bulk of the cost typically in most any trail. So on the slide here, you see there are really 5 sort of variations on trail surfaces. Natural surface, which is just basically dirt and whatever is in the terrain. It's mostly labor for the cost, although there would, of course, be possibly bridges, culverts, and those other ancillary things, but mostly labor if you're doing a hand-cut trail, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the other choices would be gravel and screenings, limestone screenings, like you see on most rail trails. Asphalt or concrete, obviously, can be recycled and sometimes is used for a trail surface. And then there's also asphalt laid down like you would a road, or concrete. And so I think all of that depends a lot on, the material, the width of the trail, the type of terrain you're dealing with, the soils and those kinds of things. But roughly speaking, you can see some ranges of prices per mile of say 150 to 300,000 for asphalt, probably 300,000 to 600,000 for concrete. But those are really rough ranges to think about. And it brings me to the last point on this slide, that every trail project is truly unique because different locations with different terrain, different grades, different soil types, it really makes it very difficult to generalize to some extent. So you're going to want to have actual contractor bids and proposals in your location to really narrow down the specific costs. But here are some examples of some different types of trail surfaces. The upper left, the natural surface, it's this beautiful winding trail out at Wilson Lake in the Switchgrass Trail System. On the right is the limestone screening type trail that you see on rail trails and a lot of urban trails. And then of course concrete, which is obviously the most durable of all of these surface types. So let's talk about the natural surface first. Natural surface, as I said here on the slide, dirt is free, but it requires much labor. And that labor actually relies upon some specialized tools and equipment. Pulaski and a McLeod there you see are the chief digging tools. So those are the kind of things that need to be purchased if you're going to build a trail. Obviously, you still need culverts, bridges, and armoring occasionally, but the surface itself is pretty simple. It's just a matter of labor. Those tools are quite specialized. We have a program you may have heard of called Trail in a Box. If you are building a trail and you don't have any of these kinds of tools, but would like to have them briefly to build a trail or temporarily, and have us come help you learn how to use them. You could obtain those in a loan called Trail in a Box. And there's a link there if you go to our website, KansasTrailsCouncil.org about Trail in a Box. So Nancy, maybe the next slide. So I think the first question a lot of people ask us is, okay, how long is it going to take me to build this trail, this natural surface trail? So we have a spreadsheet, and you can obtain this. I'll be happy to email this to you if you would like. The email address there, info@kansastrailscouncil.org. This is just a way to get a handle on the length of time it might take. And of course, the cost of that would be a factor depending on how many people are working and how many hours it will take them to build the trail. Notice at the top, there is a sort of benchmark set of data. How many feet can you produce in a minute? Can you make 2 feet of trail in a minute? That's what this assumes. And then this spreadsheet adjusts for difficulty level. And that means, are you dealing with a lot of rocks or clay or vegetation or deep bench cutting? Or is it pretty simple? Is it just real sandy, easy soil to dig? And it makes an adjustment for that, as well as if you have a crew out there working, they are not going to work for 6 or 8 hours at the same pace all day. They're going to wear down, they're going to slow down a little bit. So there's a fatigue factor built in. And at the end of the day, this is useful because while you may not be hiring a contractor to build a natural surface trail, you sometimes are trying to obtain grant funding to build such a trail, and it helps to know what the value of that labor is. So you can use this from either context. You can either try to figure out the cost of it or what the value would be if you're going to use that as an in-kind contribution. So anyway, if you want a copy of that, please feel free to email us. So the gravel and screenings that we would use on a gravel trail, there are several things to think about that factor into the costs of building a gravel trail. First of all, grades are crucial, and so you need to pay attention to the grades on a gravel trail because it will erode with water flow and be uh, sustainable if you do it correctly, but you have to be careful about those grades. And so, in other words, you're going to have to do some engineering and some ground preparation to get those grades to be sustainable. And also for ADA access, you want to be sure, that the grades are within the guidelines for ADA, which I think Jeff talked about in the first webinar we did this fall. So with regard to the materials itself, you want to put down an aggregate base, AB3 or similar, at least 3 inches deep, and screenings with fines. And fines is the dust that comes along with the screenings, another 3 inches, so that you have 6 inches of material. And then the other thing that factors in to some extent to the cost of laying down the gravel is whether it's dumped or spread by the contractor. So if you dump piles of the limestone screenings, you then have to have another machine, a skid steer usually, to spread those and to lay them along the trail length. If you have a truck that can do a spread gate and drop it as it flows, then that's another way to approach laying down the gravel and takes much less work with other equipment like a skid steer. Another cost component might be spraying the finished screenings with calcium chloride to help that set up and help it harden. And so you'd have to factor in the cost of doing that. And then finally, on gravel trails, it's really important to pack in the gravel and the screenings. Probably the best way to do this is with a roller machine, and you can rent these locally in most towns. But you can also do it with track machines. However, they spread the load out of the weight of the track machine quite a lot. So it's sometimes hard to get that to compact in initially. But with time, with rain and heat and a little time, that will settle in and will actually be pretty compacted, in a short period of time. So the next thing people ask is, well, how much gravel do I need? And so it's really pretty simple. You can figure out the length, width, and depth of that gravel and do a calculation that's shown on the sheet here. to calculate the cubic yards. And so once you have the cubic yards of gravel, that tells you how much material you need. However, most contractors will bid a price per ton as opposed to a price per cubic yard. And so we make a quick conversion of about 1.5 tons per cubic yard of the gravel. And this does vary a little bit depending on, again, how many fines are in the gravel. But if you convert that then to tonnage, and then you go to the local contractor and find what they charge per ton for the various, for gravel or screenings, and you can easily calculate then the total costs that you can expect to pay for those gravel or screenings. And again, on gravel and screenings type trails, probably talking $15,000 to $30,000 as a very broad range of cost for laying down a gravel trail. So let's see, Nancy, next. So there are also recycled materials that are sometimes used to build trails, either concrete or asphalt. And often, you can obtain these materials for free sometimes because the local road crew, the county road crew or the city road crew often comes in and grinds up the asphalt highway and recycles it in some way. Here's a photo. This is, by the way, out in Goodland, where they use the asphalt screenings, asphalt shavings from the local road project. And one thing to notice on this is you can kind of see some of the material here is larger and smaller. There's some bigger chunks. So unlike limestone screenings, which are typically pretty uniform in size, both concrete and asphalt recycled materials sometimes varies a little bit. So you're going to get a little bit less smooth, firm sort of surface, but they do firm up, and you will get a firm and stable surface here without too much trouble. Again, it needs compaction. So one question to ask yourself too is whether you want the trail to be above grade or flush with the adjoining ground. Obviously, if it's flush, you're going to have to do some excavation, and that then will get you into estimating the cost for dealing with the various soils in the rock and the terrain that you might be living with there in that location. No excavation, of course, you'd be just laying it on top of the surface. And again, width is probably the biggest cost factor. 6 or 8 or 10 feet, minimum of 6 feet is really what you'd want to do for ADA accessibility. And also depth of that material, 4 inches for people walking and biking and using the trail, but 6 inches if you have places where a vehicle needs to drive either across the trail or along the trail for maintenance. You really need to have about 6 inches of depth. And one last thing I want to say on this slide is most local contractors can easily lay down asphalt or concrete for you. I mean, they do it all the time for sidewalks and driveways and those sort of things. They may not have, however, built a trail before. And so while they could easily lay down the materials for you, they probably haven't actually designed a trail. And so you'd want to touch base with someone who has experience in designing trails so that they pay attention to the grades and think about the trail design. Then you can sort of flag that in, and any contractor who does concrete work or asphalt work can easily take that on and do a good job actually putting in the materials. One just quick note on asphalt, it does crack, and therefore it has a somewhat more limited life. You can see some cracks in this picture, I think, here. The other thing to think about on asphalt is not every asphalt contractor has machines that are narrow enough to do, say, a 6-foot wide trail. They can usually rent those and obtain them somewhere, but that's a different cost factor to think about. So you'd want to ask your contractor about availability of the machinery. And Nancy, I think we're on to concrete trails, which are clearly the longest life, most durable, most expensive trail surfaces, but they also will just give you a really pretty trail experience like you see in that photo. So I wanted to give you just a quick example of an actual project where you could see the actual, they call it sidewalk construction, but it's really a trail. And compare that to the cost of doing the excavation work and the dirt work. And you can see it's about $320 a square foot in this example for the dirt work and about $1150 a square foot for the actual materials. So that'll kind of give you some flavor of the cost. This adds up to be about a $750,000 project. And of course, a lot of the other things involved in this project are things that Jeff is going to talk about next, like some of the drainage piping and bridges and things of that sort. And we'll talk about later about Damaris will talk about kiosks and signage. But you have to think about the hard costs first of getting the surface down. And then these are the fun parts where you do signage and kiosks and bridges and things like that. One of my favorite bridges is one that's just completed in Benton, Kansas, around the city lake. You see the Benton, that's a container that was put in place to be a covered bridge. And with that, Nancy, I think I'd turn it over to Jeff to talk a little bit more about bridges. Nancy, I think we're muted.
There we go. Jeff Bender is the Regional Supervisor for the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. In the 42 years he's been in the Recreation and Parks field, Jeff has become the trails and historian expert. The $24.8 million grant he co-authored resulted in the development of the Flint Hills Trail. In recognition of his partnership as the go-to Kansas resource, the Kansas Recreation and Parks Association honored him with the 2023 KRPA Professional Award. Jeff will help us with the cost of bridges and culverts. Take it away, Jeff.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about a variety of drainage structures, ditches, pipes, boxes, which are usually concrete boxes, and bridges. So let's go to the next one. So like several of us say quite often, Mr. Goodwin's probably been heard saying it in a couple different languages, is water always wins. And so much of working on trails is designing the trails for sustainability and designing them to deal with water. And sometimes you just can't, but that's major flood or rain events happen. So that's all right. Go to the next one. So to start with, the simplest of things is ditches. And we don't normally talk about ditches. If we're talking small, like single track type trails, of course, we're designing for sustainability and designing in rolling grade dips and nicks and various features like that we've already talked about. But for the bigger trails, for bigger pedestrian trails, like rail trails, Kansas can be kind of a unique, Kansas, we all know, is not flat, but there are definitely flat places. And rail trails are an example where the trail itself is pretty much always flat. Most railroads were built at 2% or less grades, but it's going through various landscapes. You might have a cut like in the picture on the right where the trail bed or rail bed was cut through a hill. There might be places where it's built up, but the cuts are especially problematic because you still need to maintain a trail. You still need to keep water off of the trail surface. So ditches are just a basic thing. A typical rail trail cross section would look like this, except in a place that's flat or is in a cut. So the whole point is make sure you're getting positive drainage off the trail surface. And on bigger trails like shared use paths and rail trails, those sort of scenarios, not only do you need to keep the water off, we also shed the water off the surface with like a max 2% slope across the top, across slope. Okay, next slide. One of the things that those trail scenarios have quite a few of, when we're talking about different drainage structures, everybody thinks of bridges right away, but if you do have a rail trail or a different long distance trail, we have to deal with the water that's in the landscape, and water's going to be coming off the landscape onto the trail, into the trail, under the trail. And for every bridge on a long distance trail, you've probably got 10 or 20 or more culverts, whether those are pipe culverts or concrete box culverts. And on these older railroad beds that have become rail trails, some can be fantastic. They can be close to 100 years old and still be in good shape, or they can be a nightmare waiting to happen, or a nightmare that slowly happens. And so here's some examples of some pipes. These particular ones are iron or steel pipes that pulled apart. On the right, you see a concrete box that's cracking. And the only way to know if you have a rail trail or long distance trail like this, the only way to know is to examine each one of them. And really the best time to do that is in the winter. There's usually less rain, it's drier, there's not too many creepy crawly critters going through culverts or pipes. You can get down into them. Several of us have spent a lot of time crawling through pipes and culvert boxes, and it's the only way you can see. If you have a smaller pipe, there's an engineer's trick to looking at them, and because some of them, of course, we just can't fit into, is to take a mirror, go out on a sunny day and take a mirror, even a small pocket mirror, and using the sunlight, angle it into the pipe where you can really see, and it just blasts that pipe full of light and you can see any problems in there. One thing about pipes is it only takes small holes to create a problem, because if you start to have little, even pinholes, very small holes in culvert pipes, when there's large rain events and a lot of flow of water, the pressure inside those pipes, once they fill with water, turns pretty tremendous, and it starts blasting the dirt and materials out around that pipe, and it just keeps getting worse. So when we're looking at culvert pipes on like Flint Hills Trail or other ones, we're looking around, we're seeing if there's any overtopping. Is that pipe that's there now, is it large enough? And if it has to be replaced, we're going to replace it, but we never go down in size. We might want to go up in size. Engineers look at the surrounding areas and examine the drainage to calculate the water flows during major rain events to get an idea of what size pipes to specify for a replacement. Something a lot of folks want to do all the time is take shortcuts involving pipes, and it's not a good thing to do. One of the shortcuts people are prone to doing is not using end sections. And the end sections are very important, especially on the downhill or outflow end of culvert pipes, because the end section helps protect the earth or material at the end of that pipe and keeps it from washing out. The other thing that's needed is usually riprap, especially on the outflow or downhill side of the pipe also. Another thing folks do is put pipes in and they try to shortcut and put it in with like loads of gravel. You should always embed corrugated pipes or any pipes in dirt. And like these are very large pipes being replaced in this picture, the picture's at the bottom, and that's actually a robotic compactor running back and forth alongside on the dirt, compacting the dirt in order to really positively bed that pipe into and compact the soil around it. Okay, next slide. So here's an example of some older culvert boxes, and there's every shape and variety of these along some of the rail trails in Kansas, and some of them have been maybe messed with by adjacent landowners like the one on the top right, where a lot of material has been piled up on it to create a dam for a pond. Lower right shows an example of an old cut stone culvert box. Some of those are actually in good shape. Sometimes they're bad. Sometimes they'll look good on the outside, but there'll be stones that are broken or missing on the inside. A common scenario is the picture on the left there, where you have a RCB or reinforced concrete box, and it's like, no, they did not build it that way. So what's happened there was a lack of riprap or erosion protection on a downhill or outflow end of a culvert box. And all that scouring from the water coming out of there has eroded out all the material underneath it. I've seen some of these things sticking out from underneath the rail beds 10, 15 feet long up in the air. And so that's the result of excessive erosion and no riprap or erosion protection. So the concrete boxes are called RCBs, or reinforced concrete boxes. The picture on the left, you see why. They're reinforced with rebar, and to replace these is very expensive. One of our estimates from 2022 on one box, like an 8-foot by 5-foot, 50-foot long box, you're looking at about 123,000, and add inflation on top of that. In most instances, if we have reinforced concrete boxes that are getting bad, if it's beyond some small repairs to patch in or repair the concrete, after a point, it reaches a point, we just usually replace them with corrugated steel pipes and put in all the erosion protection. It's cheaper than rebuilding the boxes. Go back for 1 second there, Nancy. Another thing to consider with boxes along some of the bigger trails, the picture on the upper right was one that we had to do some extensive repairs on. And initially, this thing was probably not built long enough. So the result is, and you can see in that picture, even after we lowered the trail over the box, it's still an excessive, very steep side slope or shoulder on the trail. So in places like this, we went ahead and added handrails over top of that concrete box along the side of the trail for safety. Okay. So bridges are fun. They're fun to build. They're fun to look at. Some of them are historic. And trail bridges can be everything. It's maybe 6 foot long or 4 feet wide, made out of all types of materials. I'm not going to get into, I'm going to show some examples of stuff. There are numerous vendors and sources of bridges for sale all over the internet. On Trail Resources, American Trails is a good place to look for vendors for bridges. And some of those come in fiberglass, steel, aluminum, you name it. On our existing trails, we also have every variety of bridges. This is just some examples on Flint Hills Trail of different types of bridges that we've had or do have. Whenever we're looking at a bridge and what we're going to need to do with it, we, of course, consider the first thing is good engineering and having professional engineers determine what's needed on that. We need to adhere to AASHTO standards. We have to consider ADA standards, making sure we meet those. And another major thing is to consider maintenance and emergency access, because if building it out of, for instance, wood, that's going to mean maintenance or replacement. So we try to do all steel and concrete. And another big consideration is emergency access. You're going to build a bridge that maybe an ambulance or fire truck cannot get over. It, even on smaller bridges, at least make them wide enough for emergency vehicles or maintenance vehicles or whatever equipment you need to get across to maintain. So on the bigger trails, a lot of the bridges are of these two types. The one on the left is a concrete pan and it actually has gravel surface on top of it. The one on the right is showing a more like a typical wooden bridge. And then what we do with them after we've rebuilt them, we take off the wood ties and everything off top, get down to good solid creosote embedded wood with the big beams, replace steel beams if we need to. And we end up usually building bridges that are 14 feet wide with a 12-foot clearance in the middle between the handrails. And the concrete on a bridge is not something to shortchange on. The pans, I'll show pictures of it. We put in 5/16 galvanized steel pans, and then the concrete poured on that is typically about 10 inches thick in the middle, and it's crowned. So here was an old historic bridge on the trail that had been worked on previously with probably 3.5 or 4 inches of concrete. Well, 3.5 or 4 inches of concrete for one is not thick enough to really drive vehicles on. It'll eventually break it. Any concrete you ever going to drive a vehicle on, whether it's emergency or maintenance vehicles, should be at least 6 inches thick. 4-inch thick concrete, any heavy loads going across it will break. So we peel off the existing decks and put the pans down with rebar, build up any steel structure underneath if we need to. But the steel pans and the rebar are very important for strength. Go ahead. And the result is we've got good bridges with wide clearance. We can take basically semis across, and if we have to. So that's big bridges. Here's sort of a middle-sized bridge on a trail, and these are bridges that we build at Kaw River State Park. And the thing here I wanted to talk about was it's not very easy or convenient to get concrete into a lot of sites for building trails at. And so what we did was we used rock gabions for the bridge abutments on 3 different bridges here at Kaw River. And gabions are basically baskets. They're steel wire that's coated with basically plastic or vinyl type material, and it's made to last a long time. And then you place the rocks in the gabions. You don't dump them in, you pretty much hand place rock by hand into the gabions so it doesn't damage the coating on the wire. And what we did was I designed out bridge abutments like you would concrete, but made them out of the rock in the gabions, and then lay a steel plating on top to make a good flat surface, built up the steel frames on that, and then start putting the wood decking down. So gabions are usually used for erosion protection along streams. We used it to build up a section of trail. In the picture on the left, there's a section going around that curve that we built up using gabions. The Shunga Trail in Topeka in several spots uses gabions along a stream, and it's excellent for erosion protection. Go back 1 second. I wanted to talk too about wooden handrails on bridges. If you look at the picture on the left, there's angled boards coming down from the posts of the handrails. Those go down to a stringer that runs underneath the bridge. And the purpose of those is to support the post on the handrail. And it drives me crazy, and it should drive anybody crazy, to grab any handrail on a bridge and get it to wiggle. To me, it's, if it wiggles at all, it's not built right. It's not strong enough. And this is just one way to add extra support to those posts to keep them from moving at all or wiggling. The other thing on wood bridges is, of course, building with treated wood, but treated lumber is not what it used to be. And I think most of us know that. And it's pretty critical on doing anything using wood outdoors. And on something like a trail bridge, you want to last. You're using treated lumber, but you have to cut pieces to size. And every single cut you make, you need to treat it with wood treatment preservative. And I'm talking about the good stuff you buy in like the gallon cans, and you paint it on by hand on every cut. And really, you should do every bolt hole you do too. So other things to run past engineers are things like highway crossings, ADA access at restroom and trailhead areas. Those need to be completely ADA accessible, especially when if you use any the federal grant monies available. So electric service, water service, flashing lights at any highway crossings. If you're using any federal state grants, you're gonna end up being required to get good engineering on all those things. So that was quick, but that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate it. Our next speaker is Damaris Kunkel, and Damaris is most recently the Community Engagement Director at a Boulder Humboldt. Her most recent achievement is writing a successful $1.2 million Child Care Accelerator grant to benefit Humboldt's children, families, and employers. Damaris will share her wisdom about working with engineers, and she got this wisdom from working with Thrive Allen County on trails since 2012. Thanks, Damaris, for joining us. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
There we go. Got it. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Nancy, and everybody. I've actually been over here with a Boulder Humboldt for about almost 5 years now, which is surprising, but I've been working on trail system in Allen County since 2012. So that's kind of why I understand the process. But I'm going to specifically be talking about engineering. So I thank you guys so much for letting me talk through this with you. This is the biggest project that we've ever done, and it did require the engineering. So a brief story about the Last Mile Trail and why this was so important is we were in the development of Base Camp. I want to give shout out to Beth Barlow, who is really the lead on this, and I provide the support. But building Base Camp in it's a 21-acre campsite, and so with that happening, we were actively looking for grants for development of that campground, but also trails. And so there's a couple things that kind of aligned for us. In that same time, I had a relationship with Jenny Kramer. She was working with DHE and getting ready to transition into a job at KDOT. But in her break time, we invited her to Humboldt, Kansas. She's very a leader in active transportation and an avid cyclist. And so she actually rode her bike from Topeka to Humboldt, jumped on the Prairie Spirit Trail and rode 61 miles down that rail trail system and Southwind Rail Trail. And just asking, what did she think when she got to the end? And she was kind of like, it just stopped. And then and then what? And our vision was and then what is this mass revitalization projects that were a whole bunch of projects that were going on in town. How do we get people from the last mile right there at Base Camp in the trail system to come into, to get people to come in town to utilize our retail lot, all the things that we were creating. And then the other part was that we knew that when you live here, we had a lot of people on the mobility devices, skateboards, kids on bikes, it was really just no way to be able to get to where you needed to go unless you were in the street. And people in our community cared about safe passage. So we, not long after Jenny came down, maybe 3 months later, KDOT actually dropped the cost share grant. They created a new program called the cost share grant. And their main components were about to improve safety and support job retention and growth. And those were and improve access and mobility, all the things that we really, really were caring about. So Elizabeth Berger gave me questions to answer. And so I kind of went down those to expand on those specifically because I thought they were great questions. And so she was curious as to what the role of me and a Boulder Humboldt colleagues in working with local governments on how to get this done, because you are applying for these grants generally under your municipality. But how does a nonprofit work to be able to push that work forward? And so what we had with the Boulder Humboldt was history of nonprofit work, 10 years of child development in Allen County, a relationship with funders, an understanding of built environment, active transportation, and economic development. So being able to lead that for our city was great because they're focused on their government parts of community, like utilities and infrastructure. Our city council residents, they might not have had this work behind them. And we could absolutely write that grant and administer it. So we didn't have to add the responsibility to the city of a learning curve or to their workload. It was a very fast turnaround for that RFP. It was dropped in September, due in October, announcements were in November, and we were the best set up to be able to act fast. You can change the slide now. Oh, no, stay there. Question on how did we find engineers or the engineer firms? As soon as the award was dropped or announced, then we had engineers, fortunately, we had engineers reaching out to us. And so that's the first thing that happened. Also, KDOT had a list of contacts. And Nancy, I'm sorry, I caught that email late. I tried to get in there real quick. There is a list, a tab that has them divided out by region in the state. I'll send that to you, or maybe Jenny can, or whoever has the quickest access. We didn't use that, but I just wanted to say that it exists, so maybe somebody would use that. Another way was just networking at Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. We were there for a meeting for a different grant and met an engineer firm that was based out of K-State. And but in the end, we ended up working with someone that was a friend of a Boulder Humboldt member. A friend had worked with them before. So Wilson and Company, they've been great. What's our experience working with engineers, but also being that connector is Beth Barlow, like I noted, she's been the main connector of this. I'm the supporter. And how it's worked well is that she's been able to go to all the city council meetings, all the county commission meetings, and she's presented there. The engineers were also present, so they could be there to answer technical questions, which was imperative. Besides being that person in the community that wants the project to be done, it is imperative to have engineers. And so how we use the engineering plans in several ways. The engineering was very important, like I said, because what it did take away, or what it was able to edit out, was the expert opinions of everybody. In our everybody comes out, was awarded, they're like, I think it should be here, I think it should be there, and all of those are great opinions to have. But in the end, it was important to have somebody that could really say it has to be this way, and so the engineers took out 3 different routes into consideration. And in the end, based off that initial study, they made the decision that was the most practical, the most connective, and the most cost-effective way. Those plans were then presented to our city council and to our county commissioners, and we invited the whole community to come out to check out the plans. And it was really important to us to make sure that all the questions were answered and all the fears were alleviated maybe by the residents that would be most affected by that. And, you know, they had questions about our tree. What is this going to damage our tree? What about our, you know, our sidewalk that we have? What about drainage? And so we were able to have that kind of community conversation or forum to really take the time. And we had a lot of people show up. We had a lot of great questions and gave it all the space that it needed. Here's the slide that we'll be on now. Okay. The stickers, no, go back one. Because the question was, what can people expect to pay for engineering services and how did you find your money? KDOT in the cost share RFP, or maybe even just in conversation with them, they did allow us in the technical assistant conversations with them. They did note to us that these engineering costs could be 10 to 20% of what the total project is. So I don't think we were in necessarily sticker shock. It's just more that engineering has to happen and it's a very expensive part of a construction project and it's hard to find the funding for that. But what made us successful in that is that I knew of foundations that might help with the cost of that. I kept Sunflower Foundation. I mean, I just paid attention all the time to see if they were going to drop an RFP for some sort of trail stuff, and they ended up doing that. And this time they had a new program that they would pay for engineering. So lucky us, we were able to secure that for engineering, and I hope that continues. And then also Health Forward Foundation, they had an applicant to find grants. So we were able to utilize 2 grant applications specific to engineering costs. And out of the $139,000 engineering costs for this project, we were able to get $130,000 worth of grants to cover that. So our end was a $9,000 cash match. You can change the slide back. Okay. The reason that the grant was very important is that the last mile trail would directly connect 61 miles of trail system to our downtown. And in the process of that, at least 40 daily needs, amenities, and businesses. And then I just kind of gave the list out of what all of those were. And then let's talk about like our lessons learned is that really what I would love to challenge the state, all of the experts that have been doing trail building for all these years, that have done any presentations for city council or county municipalities, since a lot of these grants do have to funnel through our municipalities. So it means we have to do these presentations over and over. What I would love to have, and I've known this for a decade at least, is every question that a resident or a city council person might have around trails and why they can't work. It's like, a frequently asked question sheet that captures all of those and the real technical answers to them, you know, not the emotional answers, the technical answers to those, you know. Do we have that? That was important when we got in front of everybody, because we can't always anticipate every single question that the council might have. Even through all of my experience of presenting, there's always a new question, and it's just like, wow, I really wish I would have had an answer to that for them, because in a rural community, it can punt you out another 30 days before you can have that conversation again. Fortunately for Humboldt, they're on board and they unanimously approved our engineering plan. So last thing I want to say is specifically about a Boulder Humboldt, that why we care besides the community is, I just would love to show you some of the amenities or some of the businesses that a Boulder Humboldt have been creating since 2017, and why and how this trail will connect to them. So can you click on that a Boulder Humboldt link so I can show you the work? Does that work, Nancy? Okay. We can just slide through. It's a boulderhumboldt.com. You can see, keep going down. Here's some of our projects. We've got a brewery. We've got Base Camp. We've got Humboldt Mercantile. We have a coffee shop, Bijou Confectionery, Airbnbs, a fitness center, a hotel, a brunchery, Pyrenees Cocktail Lounge, a music venue. We do a lot of events such as the Hitching Post, a bookstore to come, and Frostbite Shape Ice, our garden school, and then our Pocket Park Life is fine with food trucks there, and the events that we do in the downtown square, movies on the square, and Waterworks. That's all. Did I get that done in 12 minutes?
Thank you very much, Damaris.
In
Um,
the interest of time, I'm jumping in, Nancy. We're gonna skip over my slides. I had talked to an engineer. The slides will be available. It's basically have a plan when you go to the engineers. Don't expect them to have the plan for you. And then a little bit about KS Hub, which is a funding source, and we can talk more about that in January. Nancy, toss it back to you so you can toss it to Craig.
Perfect. Okay, Craig Crossett is the brand new city manager of Goddard, Kansas. Craig finds immense value in promoting active lifestyles within communities through investment in trails and similar amenities. He has championed a number of projects in his time serving the city of Sterling, including the Warrior Way Trail in partnership with Sunflower and the Transportation Alternatives Project with the Kansas Department of Transportation. So Craig, we're going to take it to you.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm gonna condense 10 minutes down into about 90 seconds because I want people to be able to ask questions over these last few minutes. So I'm really gonna go straight to the costs, right? So I have been blessed to serve in a couple of communities that have valued these kind of amenities. I'm now in Goddard after 5 years in Sterling. Here in Goddard, we have the Prairie Sunset Trail managed by the Prairie Travelers. It's amazing, old rail to trail. But some of the projects that I've been involved in have really been grassroots. So, small little amenities over the years and consistently investing time and effort. And then after a while, they become something really big and nice that the community's proud of. Some costs associated with these different items. There's Bernston trail markers. You can see there on the bottom left. They're a little bit more expensive than they should be for some reason. They're $94 a piece. I don't know if there's any gold in there or why they're so expensive, but if you can embed them in a concrete trail, folks probably want to do that every 8th mile or maybe every quarter mile. Then there's kiosks that you can look at doing. I don't have a picture of that in my presentation, but we partnered with our Home Lumber, which there's like 11 locations in Kansas. Maybe a good chance that there's somebody on the call who has a Home Lumber near them. They're always interested in providing materials for community type projects. We did about a $5,000 kiosk with a $2,500 map in it. And the map has like all of the points of interest in our community. So you can check that out while you're utilizing trail amenities. The benches and picnic tables, you can partner with KDHE's Healthy Living program, and you can pick up $500 to $1,000 benches, and they will pay for a good portion of that. It's the recycled rubber that they turn into benches. We have those along our trails. Stainless steel trash cans, you're looking at about $1,000 a piece. A lot of this stuff has gotten a lot more expensive than it was 5 years ago. And then the wayfinding signage, which you saw in a previous slide, we partner with Luminous Neon out of Hutchinson, Kansas for those. If you do several, sometimes they'll give you a bulk discount, but those are about $2,500 each. And then we have heritage signage, which is stainless steel, custom metalwork. The heritage signage is really important, kind of creates a bit of a vibe on the trail, ties it into the culture and heritage of your community. Those are about $3,000 each for the fabrication and the powder coating. So being a municipal executive, I have a good network of volunteers as well as city employees that are willing to donate their labor. And my colleague Michael mentioned earlier the use of asphaltic millings. A lot of times a trail starts out as a dirt path or maybe a path that somebody next door mowed. Then maybe the city does a mill and overlay project, and you can use the leftover millings to start having a subsurface. If you can mix some AB3 in there, all the better. And I'm talking about the cheap way to do it. Jeff's probably wouldn't agree with some of my tactics, but in a town of 2,000, you got to start there. So, and then eventually, your asphaltic millings, you can mix in a little tack oil and put a few more inches there and roll it in, and you got a nice asphaltic trail. So, if you can't afford to do concrete right away and you want to get started, that's a way to do it. So the city did build the kiosk, Elizabeth, and one of our public works employees drew the plans himself. He's a bit of a carpenter by trade, and it's turned out really good. So I blazed through that. I had a lot more to talk about and share, but I wanted to be quick. So thank you for the opportunity, guys.
I'm gonna jump in and say, I think, Craig, you had a lot of good information in that, and there's not any specific more questions I see in the chat box. So if you'd like to share a little bit more, I think it's especially important how you used the trail and especially the sign to kind of celebrate the culture in Sterling around the Warrior Way. So we have a few minutes for you to share a little bit more.
Yeah, one of the things that you're able to accomplish with the heritage signage is you can get people onto the trail that might not otherwise be interested in it. It gives them a reason. They hear about this cool artistic element out there, and so maybe they'll go check it out. And now you just promoted an active lifestyle with someone who maybe otherwise didn't have one already, which is very important to me because promoting active lifestyle amenities can improve healthcare outcomes, which is something I care deeply about with the citizens that I serve. So,
Greg, someone else just asked me, they keep asking me, I'm not the expert, you are. When you were looking for these items, like where did you even go to figure out how do I find a little metal thing to embed into my trail to tell people how far they've walked?
I'm so glad you asked that because I didn't do a good job of acknowledging the important people who, did this work alongside me and know much more about it than I do. But we had a what I called the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee in Sterling, which was kind of bred about through active tourism grant that was received. And so that committee stayed together after the bicycle pedestrian plan was constructed. And all those folks who were on that committee were obviously interested in these types of things. And so they said, they had been on paths before or whatever and knew about these different things that are needed for good trails and such. So lean on the people in your community who are active tourists that like to go visit these things and have seen all the different features that are around the state, and they can bring back ideas to your community.
I don't see any other questions. Do you, Elizabeth?
No, I'm sorry. I've been in 4 different places during this webinar today.
Well, you've done
I
it.
just want to, if you want to take it to the slide about the funding opportunity, Nancy, and I want to thank Damaris and Craig especially for jumping on today, kind of at the last minute as Sunflower grantees. And I was just always impressed by the level of thought and intention you put into your projects and how much I learned from both of you about what it takes to work with engineers, and then also how special amenities can really make a trail. Real quickly, everyone, I'm taking time to tell you this now because the deadline is January 15th. American Trails does have their capacity building, what do they call it? Sorry, I've got too many emails coming in on my screen. I can't even see the slide anymore. They've got their trail opportunity up, and they do fund trail maintenance, what they call stewardship, and then research. I have noticed with the grants they've done in the past, they do a few maintenance, but what they really like to do is stewardship and volunteers. So if you are building a trail with volunteers and there's some component of it where you're training the trainer, that would be perfect for this. But the application is very short and I would say go for it. If you have some trail maintenance needs, I've got all the info there and Nancy will send the slides out too. So just wanted to make sure you knew this. You have a month to get your application in.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And we do have our next call slated in January for, and I don't have any of that in front of me, but I think we're going to be talking about where to find the funds, right?
It's the second Tuesday in January, which I think is, I don't know, the second Tuesday in January. And now that you've learned how much everything costs, and Tuesday we'll talk a little bit more about how to find money for that.
I
So
think
we
it's
look forward to doing that. Thank you, everyone.
January 9, I think it is.
Yeah, January 9th. And thank you so much for joining us. Oh, here, if I'd just gone one slide forward, where will we find the money on January the 9th? And all of the slides and any information in the chat will be put onto our Trail Talk Tuesday call. And if you were registered for the call, well, you'll get the follow-up telling you about it. So thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you next month.
Bye.